It's okay. Fourth alarm.
Mark it.
Slate 2, roll 1, film Vietnam. Interview with Bennell and Koch.
Your head's in shot at the moment.
Do you think that the Australian media lived up to its responsibility, the television media lived up to its responsibility of covering the Vietnam War?
Which years do you mean, you see? If you
Or
mean
generally?
My time there, 67, was a developing time in television in Australia as to what the guidelines were. I think probably in retrospect, the later years, the late 60s, the beginning of the 70s, when we were well into public affairs coverages that you're used to today, that then the whole type of coverage, good, bad, warts and all, started to really come out.
Would you agree with that, Norm?
I think from a commercial point of view, I think the commercial stations in the very early stages did not live up to what was required of such an important event. They did, perhaps in the context of Australian developments, where there was significant opposition as well as support for Australia's commitment. There were a number of current affairs programs presenting both sides, but very few commercial television stations made any effort to visit Vietnam to bring back for their own stations reports on the actual situation there. And this happened right through up until the time, I think, in the early 70s. I think I was one of the first to represent my station in the field in Vietnam.
And that was still just a quick 2-week tour?
It was indeed, yes. We depended in commercial television for film supplied by mainly the American networks and through film given to us by the RAAF or the Australian Army.
This is largely the case. Well, this was a case.
No, hit it again anyway, I wasn't quite the speed. Now again, thank you.
Slate 3, roll 1, Vietnam. Bennell and Koch. Was there ever any pressure placed on the ABC to not cover something or to drop some footage because it was too politically embarrassing to the government of the day?
I can't think quickly of a pressure about TV footage, but I'll give you an example of the atmosphere of the time that I was there, as distinct from what it's like now or what it was like 2 years ago. When John Gorton was Prime Minister, during that period, late 67, when the Paris peace talks opened, he made a very firm request to the ABC that it not broadcast that on its overseas service, because the battalion in Vietnam, fighting there, risking their lives there, he felt if the troops heard that on Radio Australia, it would undermine their morale.
Mm-hmm.
And he put this very forcefully. Now, I think to the ABC's credit at that stage, it didn't go along with that, and it showed its independence by broadcasting the fact of the Paris peace talks. It would have been a dreadful milestone for us had we caved in on that one.
But nevertheless, it did cave in on the Burchett one.
Ah, yes. Tony Ferguson's interview was canned, yes.
Mm.
But I wouldn't compare the two. I think the attitude to Burchett as an Australian over the Korean allegations and what have you, a very different matter.
Norm, do you think that, were there any instances at all?
Can I just interrupt you one thing? The ABC at that point, the controller of news and what have you, didn't believe that Burchett's opinion could be trusted. That was the issue then.
Nevertheless, the ABC did pride itself on objectivity and presenting both sides. Mm. Really, we hadn't seen the other side of the war, had we?
And he had.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Norm, what do you think about that allegation that there's certain political pressures placed upon commercial stations to drop news that wasn't particularly favourable?
I don't know of any cases where there are any political pressures on the commercial stations to drop news that wasn't politically favourable on the Vietnam situation. In fact, I don't think it happened, neither on the station that I worked for or any other commercial station. We were aware of the responsibilities, and this may sound a bit funny that commercial stations are aware of some of the responsibilities. We were aware of responsibilities in this area because Vietnam, whether we liked it or not, involved an Australian commitment. So we did endeavour to present the Australian contribution to what was going on. Whether it was justified or not was nothing that we normally made our own judgment on.
How do you feel the proposition that television, both the ABC and commercial stations, claimed to give an objective coverage of the war, but in actual fact the coverage that they gave was the personal prejudices of, say, the ABC upper management, or alternately the managers who own the television stations?
Well, the ABC never claimed to give a balanced coverage, because we always pointed out that we couldn't get into North Vietnam. So it was always a one-sided coverage from the ABC viewpoint. But I think in their terms of what was regarded as objective then, and I'd put to the old counsellor to the cadet thing that objectivity is the point of view you agree with. So they thought they were objective at that period.
Yeah, how do you view their objectivity at that period? Was it really objective?
No, it was a committed coverage, committed to an Australian involvement, committed to the United States. No, it wasn't objective as I see it now in 1978.
This was the problem that we faced. We were depending quite a large amount on film shot by American, or shot for the American networks.
This is the case for the ABC too?
I think the ABC used a fair amount of American film too.
Oh, we used a great deal.
Why, given the fact that we had a battalion of troops up there, didn't we view it more seriously?
Well, I think we did view it as seriously as we could in the context of what was available. Film was supplied to us of the Australian activities, but I do think that the film that was supplied to us about Australian activities didn't give a true picture. When I arrived in '72, you know, I'd been led to believe that the Australians had made the area of Vung Tau completely safe. But when I went there in '72, I found that after 400 odd lives and a large number of wounded Australians, that the area was probably less secure than it had ever been.
Just to sum up then, do you both think that television, since it's credited with bringing an early end to the war, or helping to, really lived up to its responsibility?
Oh, I do. I think that when you view it in historical terms, it was the first war fought with television in the field. In other words, if you take any previous, the Korean War, the Second World War, what battalion commanders said was happening is what the correspondents got for the newspapers and what have you. This time, there was frequently a visual impact for viewers different to the official version of the event. Now that makes television, in terms of journalism in war coverage,
but in your own experience, you said you were largely confined or had to stay in Saigon to get what was happening there for fear of missing out on a story, that you covered it through the 5 o'clock follies.
I was covering a daily coverage situation.
If you weren't going out in the field, how could you really claim to have an objective view?
The cameraman was in the field all the time.
What about your viewpoint on the media?
Well, I think television did a fairly good job. I won't go to... It's impossible, it was impossible for television to really discharge all the responsibilities of television unless it could be shot from the other side as well. In a war situation, I mean, we're dedicated to one side or another. We happen to be on the South Vietnamese side, so the activities of the North Vietnamese, of course, weren't known to us, and obviously it was only possible to film as much as we were allowed to in a South Vietnam, from a South Vietnamese point of view.
Why did people turn off to the war after a while, well, from what they saw on their television screens?
Well, I think that the obvious the failure of the Americans and its allies to really create a winning situation. It came home to people through the television coverage, amongst other things.
I think too that any situation served up day by day in newscasts and news bulletins becomes monotonous. And particularly in America, where the coverage was daily by the 3 networks, it began to be a grind until you had that exceptional story that brought it back up again.
Was it up to the journalist in the field, or alternately the news editor, to turn around and try and make television different, or try and get something that would make more of an impact upon people?
Well, it's first of all up to the journalist in the field to get that material, but then there's a lot more involved after he's sent it in as to what happens to it and how it's treated and what prominence it's given, etc.
Okay, we'll cut there.
Buddy.
Right, you better go, mate. I've pushed it.
That's all right.
I know.
Well, listen, if you want to check on anything, you know where to
Get hold of you indeed.
Yeah.